Dear listener, welcome once more to our Chamber of Mysteries, where the shadows of human folly lie thick upon the floor, and Hercule Poirot, the great Belgian detective, attends to them with the most fastidious of little grey cells. Tonight, we journey to Blackmoor Hall, a sprawling country estate set upon the lonely moors of Derbyshire, where autumn winds sweep across the barren heather and rattling rains lash against its high stone windows. Within those ancient halls lies a tale most grave, of love concealed, ambition betrayed, and a forbidden affair that dared to defy both propriety and fate. Settle yourself, dear listener. Draw the curtains close, and allow the firelight of imagination to illumine the darkness, for the case of the forbidden affair at Blackmoor Hall is about to begin. Chapter 1. Arrival at Blackmoor Hall. The autumn winds swept over the wild moors of Derbyshire with a desolate majesty, carrying upon their breath the fragrance of wet heather and the promise of storm. As dusk descended, a low mist began to curl across the rolling hills, softening the outlines of trees and hedgerows, until all the world seemed a painting in faded ink. Against this sombre backdrop, a motor-car wound its way along the narrow road, its lanterns glowing like two vigilant eyes. Within the vehicle, Hercule Poirot sat upright and immaculate, his small frame encased in a perfectly pressed grey suit, his moustaches, as always, a marvel of exactitude. Beside him, Captain Hastings leaned with an air of genial curiosity, gazing out upon the desolate expanse. "Bleak country, Poirot," he remarked, drawing his coat more tightly around him. "Not a soul in sight for miles. I can't imagine what compels anyone to build a grand estate in such an inhospitable place." Poirot folded his gloved hands upon his knee. "Mais non, Hastings. It is the isolation that attracts, do you not see? To live in the midst of so much quiet grandeur is to be reminded each morning of one's importance in so vast a stage. Lord Blackmoor, he is a man of title, of property."
"Chill," he shivered, brushing the rain from his hat. Poirot, emerging with careful precision, tapped his umbrella once against the stones, before ascending the steps. They were admitted into the grand entrance hall, whose vaulted ceiling soared like the nave of a cathedral. Portraits of Blackmoor ancestors, stern and unsmiling, gazed down from the walls. A great fire roared in the hearth, but even its warmth seemed to struggle against the chill that permeated the stone. The butler, grave and dignified, announced them. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings." Lord Henry Blackmoor himself advanced from the drawing-room beyond. He was a man of middle years, broad of shoulder, and commanding in presence, with iron-grey hair brushed impeccably back. Yet there lingered about his eyes a fatigue, as though the burdens of estate and conscience alike had worn their weight upon him. "Poirot, Captain Hastings," he declared heartily, extending his hand. "Most welcome to Blackmoor Hall. We are honoured indeed." Poirot inclined his head with courtly grace. "The honour, Lord Blackmoor, is mine. Your invitation, it flatters me, though I am but a humble seeker after truth." "Nonsense," Blackmoor replied with a laugh that did not quite reach his eyes. "You are the celebrated detective of Europe, and perhaps of the world. When one entertains, it is fitting to have the keenest mind present. You will find our party quite lively, I trust." As he spoke, others began to emerge, curious to greet the new arrivals. It was at such occasions that Hastings's eye, always attentive to matters of appearance, took swift note of each figure. Lady Margaret Ellsworth was the first. Tall, poised, and exquisitely dressed in a gown of midnight blue, she moved with the elegance of one born to command attention. Her dark hair was arranged with studied carelessness, her lips painted in the fashion of the time. Yet beneath her polished exterior, Hastings discerned a watchfulness, as though each word and gesture concealed some deeper unease. "Lady Margaret," Lord Blackmoor introduced, "our dear neighbour and most cherished friend." "Cherished indeed," she said, her voice low.
Hastings warmed instantly to the man's bluff manner. Behind him came a slighter figure, Miss Evelyn Hartley, the governess. She was modestly attired in pale grey, a manner quiet, her eyes large and luminous. She greeted them with a nervous curtsy, her cheeks colouring as Poirot spoke to her with gentle courtesy. There was in her demeanour an air of suppressed emotion, like a violin string drawn taut. And then Mr. Charles Denham, a barrister in his 30s, with sleek hair and an impeccable suit that seemed to proclaim both prosperity and ambition. His smile was quick, his eyes calculating, as though measuring in an instant the advantage of each acquaintance. "An honour, Monsieur Poirot," he declared with easy charm. "I dare say we are in safe hands indeed, should anything untoward occur." Poirot's moustaches quivered ever so slightly. "Let us hope, monsieur, that the need does not arise." Lastly, Mrs. Lydia Harcourt entered, a plump society matron bedecked in jewels that clinked faintly as she moved. Her eyes, small and sharp, darted from guest to guest with avid curiosity, and her smile was the practised beam of one who thrives on the secrets of others. "Such a delight to meet you both," she cooed. "And what excitement to have Monsieur Poirot in our midst! Why, half the county will be green with envy." Introductions complete, the party moved to the drawing-room, where cocktails awaited. The firelight flickered upon polished wood and velvet draperies, casting shadows that seemed almost alive. Conversation commenced in a dozen threads, overlapping and intertwining. Hastings, sipping his drink, leaned close to Poirot. "Quite the assortment, eh? You've the fashionable lady, the crusty colonel, the timid governess, the ambitious barrister, and the gossiping matron. If I didn't know better, I'd say we were in for a detective story ourselves." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Mais oui, mon ami. Life, it is ever a detective story. Only one must look closely to perceive the plot." Lord Blackmoor, meanwhile, had seated himself by the hearth, drawing Evelyn Hartley subtly nearer. Their conversation, though spoken in, was forced, Lady Margaret's wit tinged with bitterness, Colonel Redfern's joviality a shade too loud, and Miss Hartley's reserve trembling on the verge of confession. When at last the hour grew late, the guests retired to their chambers. Poirot, in his room overlooking the misty lawns, stood for some time at the window, watching the moors stretch away into darkness. The wind moaned about the turrets, rattling the panes with ghostly fingers. Hastings, already half in bed, called sleepily from within. "Well, Poirot, what do you make of them all?" Poirot turned, extinguishing the lamp with deliberate care. "What do I make, Hastings? Only this, that beneath these ancient stones there is much that is concealed. And the night, the night, she will reveal it." He lay down, hands folded upon his breast, his eyes alert in the darkness, while somewhere in the vast corridors of Blackmoor Hall a door creaked softly on its hinges, and the storm beyond gathered its strength. Chapter 2. Shadows of Suspicion. The following morning dawned grey and brooding, as though the heavens themselves conspired to veil Blackmoor Hall in secrecy. The rain of the night had softened into a relentless drizzle, whispering against the window panes and gathering into rivulets that streaked the glass. Beyond, the moors stretched endlessly, half shrouded in mist, the heather bent low beneath the sodden air. Inside, however, the household stirred to life, Fireplaces crackled, servants bustled discreetly through corridors, and the aroma of breakfast drifted faintly from the kitchens below. Poirot descended with Hastings to the breakfast room, his attire as ever faultless, a grey suit of understated elegance, his moustaches gleaming, his patent leather shoes polished to mirror sheen. Hastings, by contrast, looked cheerful but faintly dishevelled, having battled his collar with less success. The long dining table was already half occupied. Colonel Redfern sat at one end, vigorously buttering toast with a martial precision, his newspaper spread like a campaign map before him. Lady Margaret Ellsworth lingered nearby, stirring her coffee with absent motions, her gaze fixed.
Nothing like fresh country air. Air damp enough to drown in, grunted Redfern, folding his newspaper with a snap. Dashed climate. Lady Margaret gave a thin smile. We are fortunate, perhaps, that the damp cannot extinguish our spirits quite so easily as it does the fire in the hearth. But it tries its best. Poirot, seating himself with a graceful adjustment of cuffs, cast his gaze about the table. His eyes lingered briefly upon Blackmoor and Evelyn Hartley, noting the subtle exchange of glances between them. Quick, cautious, yet eloquent. Lady Margaret's hand trembled slightly as she raised her cup, though her voice was steady when she spoke of some trivial matter. To the casual observer, nothing was amiss, but to Poirot, these little ripples upon the surface betrayed a far deeper current. After breakfast, the company dispersed. Lord Blackmoor suggested a tour of the estate, though the weather was far from welcoming. Colonel Redfern volunteered at once, boasting that he feared neither rain nor mud, and Hastings, with his usual enthusiasm for anything outdoors, agreed to accompany. Poirot declined politely, preferring to acquaint himself with the hall's interior, whose long corridors and shadowed alcoves seemed to invite exploration. Thus it was that he found himself later in the drawing-room, where Lady Margaret sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly upon her lap. She started when she realized she was not alone. "Ah, Monsieur Poirot," she said, her composure recovering at once. "Forgive me, I had not noticed you." "I disturb you, madame?" Poirot inquired gently. "Not at all." Her voice was calm, though her eyes betrayed restlessness. "Only the gloom of this place weighs upon one's spirits. Blackmoor Hall is magnificent, yes, but at times magnificence can be oppressive." Poirot inclined his head. "It is true, madame. The weight of ancestry, it presses heavily, n'est-ce pas? These portraits, they seem to watch, to judge." He gestured delicately to the stern faces gazing down from gilded frames. Lady Margaret gave a brittle laugh. "Perhaps, or perhaps it is only that the present weighs more heavily than the—"
Had been observing in silence, allowed his eyes to rest upon Denham's slender hands as they adjusted his cuffs. A man always concerned with appearances, Poirot thought. A man who weighs each word before uttering it. It was during this meal that the first true spark of tension became visible. Lord Blackmoor, raising his glass in a casual toast, addressed Evelyn Hartley with a warmth that, though measured, was unmistakable. "To Miss Hartley," he said, "who bears with such grace the hardships of our dreary weather." The governess blushed, murmuring her thanks. Yet, across the table, Lady Margaret's eyes flashed. A spark swiftly veiled, but not before it had illuminated the depths of her wounded pride. Colonel Redfern, oblivious, continued his tale of polo in the Punjab, while Mrs. Harcourt's lips curved in the faintest of knowing smiles. As the meal concluded, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Dash it all, Poirot, do you notice how Blackmoor looks at that young lady? If I didn't know better, I'd say—" Poirot raised a finger. "Hush, Hastings. It is not polite to speculate upon matters of the heart. And yet—" His gaze lingered thoughtfully upon Lady Margaret. And yet, such matters they may prove instructive. That evening brought the formal dinner, a grand affair in the great dining hall. The long table glittered with silver and crystal, while chandeliers cast 1,000 reflections upon the polished surface. Servants glided silently, pouring wine, presenting dishes. The storm outside had redoubled, lashing at the windows with relentless fury, and the fire roared as though in answer. Conversation flowed at first with ease. Denham discoursed upon recent trials in London, displaying his eloquence. Mrs. Harcourt gossiped delicately about mutual acquaintances. Colonel Redfern growled amiably about the decline of discipline in the younger generation. Yet, beneath it all, there lingered a restlessness, a tension that even Hastings, usually slow to perceive such undercurrents, began to feel. It was Lady Margaret who gave it voice, albeit obliquely. Lifting her glass, she observed with quiet irony how swiftly some men forget their vow. The chimneys like a chorus of wraiths. Yet within the dining hall, another storm gathered, invisible but no less dangerous. For beneath the courteous phrases and sparkling laughter, suspicion was beginning to stir. Suspicion of motives unspoken, of desires forbidden, of secrets too long concealed. When at last the dinner concluded and the company withdrew once more to the drawing-room, Poirot found himself alone for a moment by the fire. Hastings joined him, whispering low. "By Jove, Poirot, Lady Margaret's remark was practically a challenge. Did you see Blackmoor's face? There's something brewing here, mark my words." Poirot nodded gravely. "Yes, mon ami. Already the shadows, they lengthen. And within those shadows, I fear, lies the seed of tragedy." As if in answer, a peal of thunder shook the very foundations of Blackmoor Hall. The lights flickered, the guests murmured uneasily, and somewhere in the vast house a door slammed with an echo that seemed to carry far longer than any mere gust of wind could warrant. Poirot's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "It begins, Hastings," he murmured. "It begins." Chapter 3. The Forbidden Affair Revealed. Night descended upon Blackmoor Hall with a solemn majesty. The storm that had battered the house all through dinner did not abate, but deepened, as though the moors themselves had joined the quarrel of the heavens. Rain lashed against the windows with furious insistence, and the wind moaned through every turret and chimney, rattling doors in their frames, whispering in the draughty passages. The guests, fatigued by the long evening, began to retire one by one to their rooms. Servants extinguished lamps in the drawing-room, folded away playing cards and crystal glasses, and gathered the remnants of the day's festivities. Yet not all sought sleep at once. Within the labyrinth of Blackmoor Hall, footsteps echoed faintly. Hushed voices murmured behind closed doors. Secrets, it seemed, had no intention of slumber. Poirot, as was his custom, withdrew early, pleading fatigue. Yet once in his chamber he remained wakeful, sitting at his small escritoire to polish his mustaches and order his thoughts. Hastings, meanwhile, had retired in flickering light of a single lamp. Hastings descended the staircase, each step creaking faintly beneath his tread. The hall at night was a place transformed, the grandeur of day reduced now to whispers, shadows, and the faint echo of his own movements. As he neared the landing, he paused. From somewhere below, beyond the half-closed doors of the study, came the sound of raised voices. A man's tones, deep, urgent, and edged with anger, and a woman's reply, tremulous but no less intense. Hastings, struck by curiosity, halted in the shadows, reluctant to intrude yet compelled to listen. The man's voice first. You cannot expect me to endure this torment, Evelyn. You know what society would say, what ruin it would bring." Then the woman's, unmistakably Miss Hartley's, low but fervent. "I have given you everything, Henry, my trust, my affection. Do you think I can live in this house, day after day, and bear the scorn of their eyes? They already whisper. And you grow cold, evasive. Have I misjudged you so cruelly?" Lord Blackmoor's reply came sharp as a whip crack. "Enough! You know not what you ask. My honor, my estate, all hang upon these choices. If I were to wed you—" There was a silence, filled only by the fury of the storm. Then Miss Hartley again, her voice breaking. "Then you leave me no choice." A chair scraped upon the floor. Footsteps, swift and uneven, crossed the study. Hastings, startled, drew back into the shadows. The door opened abruptly, and Evelyn Hartley emerged, her face pale, eyes glistening with tears. She clutched a small lace handkerchief in her hand, which, in her haste, slipped unnoticed to the floor. She passed close by Hastings without perceiving him, her whole being consumed in distress, and disappeared up the staircase. Hastings remained rooted a moment, torn between propriety and curiosity. At last he descended the final steps and, glancing about to assure himself unseen, stooped to retrieve the handkerchief. It was delicate,
disordered air, and the handkerchief in his hand. "Ah, mon ami," he said softly. "You have been for a little promenade, n'est-ce pas? And in the promenade you have encountered drama." Hastings hesitated, then confessed all. The quarrel, the words overheard, the governess's hasty flight, and the pistol's ominous sound. Poirot listened without interruption, his head inclined, his fingertips pressed together. When Hastings finished, Poirot extended a hand. "The handkerchief, if you please." He examined it with meticulous care, noting the monogram, the faint trace of perfume. Then, replacing it delicately upon the table, he rose. "You have done well, Hastings. To observe, it is not a crime. To eavesdrop, eh bien, it is not the conduct of a gentleman, but it is sometimes most instructive. What you have heard, it is serious, très sérieux. The words, they betray fear, anger, desperation. And the pistol, that is the detail one must never forget." Hastings, alarmed, asked, "Do you think Blackmoor means to harm himself?" Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Perhaps. Or perhaps, mon ami, the pistol will find itself employed in a manner less voluntary." They spoke no more, for the lateness of the hour pressed upon them. Yet, as Hastings retired once more to bed, he could not banish from his mind the image of Evelyn's pale, stricken face, nor the grim tones of Lord Blackmoor's despair. The storm outside beat upon the windows, and sleep came to Hastings only fitfully. Poirot, however, did not sleep. He sat long into the night, pondering, his mind arranging the pieces of this unfinished puzzle. He rose once to pace the room, his slippers soundless upon the rug, then returned to his chair, where the shadows of the fire played upon his thoughtful face. Elsewhere in the hall, other dramas unfolded unseen. Lady Margaret Ellsworth, sleepless, walked her chamber in agitation, pausing often at the window to stare out upon sombre, his manner courteous but distracted. Hastings, catching Poirot's glance across the table, felt the unspoken weight of the previous night. The handkerchief, carefully folded, lay in Poirot's pocket, awaiting its moment to reveal its tale. And so, beneath the clatter of cups and the polite murmur of voices, the echoes of that midnight quarrel still lingered. Whispers of love betrayed, of honor endangered, of a choice yet unresolved. Poirot, sipping his chocolate with measured grace, murmured half to himself, "There is more passion in this house than its walls can contain. And passion, Hastings, passion is the seed of tragedy." Chapter 4. Murder in the Night. The storm raged on, though by the following evening it had taken on a strange rhythm, less violent, but more insidious, as though whispering its warning across the moors. The rain came and went in sudden bursts, the wind moaned low through the chimneys, and Blackmoor Hall groaned beneath the onslaught of nature, as though the house itself were reluctant host to the tensions swelling within its walls. The dinner hour passed with uneasy civility. Lord Blackmoor presided over the table with grim composure, his features sternly composed, though his eyes betrayed sleeplessness. Evelyn Hartley, pale and subdued, kept her gaze lowered, scarcely tasting her food. Lady Margaret's attempts at gaiety faltered. Mrs. Harcourt prattled on, her chatter desperate to fill the silence. Colonel Redfern barked once or twice about politics, and Charles Denham eyed everyone with a calculating coolness. Poirot alone seemed serene, his small frame upright, his moustaches immaculate, his eyes glancing here and there with the patience of a cat awaiting the mouse. Hastings, ever observant, noted the undercurrents with unease. It was a table of actors, each concealing a private turmoil, and behind their civility hovered the shadow of something irrevocable. After dinner, the company dispersed once more. Lady Margaret retired early with a headache. Evelyn excused herself to tend to correspondence. Colonel Redfern retreated as though the house itself held its breath. It was shortly after midnight when it came, a single sharp sound that pierced through the wind and rain. A gunshot. Hastings awoke at once, sitting bolt upright. "Good heavens, Poirot, did you hear that?" Poirot was already on his feet, his dressing gown wrapped about him, his face grave. "Oui, mon ami, a pistol from the direction of the study." Together they hurried into the corridor, where already doors were opening, startled faces peering out. Evelyn Hartley appeared, her face white, one hand pressed to her throat. Lady Margaret clutched her dressing gown about her, eyes wide with fear. Colonel Redfern thundered from his chamber, demanding an explanation. But Poirot did not pause for speculation. He hurried down the great staircase, Hastings close upon his heels, and made directly for the study. The door was closed, but a thin curl of smoke drifted from beneath. Poirot grasped the handle, found it locked, and rapped sharply. "Lord Blackmoor, are you there?" No reply. "Quickly, Hastings, the key!" Poirot glanced about and seized a small brass key that hung upon the wall, the emergency duplicate for such occasions. With swift precision, he unlocked the door and flung it open. The sight within froze the company at the threshold. Lord Blackmoor lay slumped across his great oak desk, his head bowed, his right hand limp at his side. A pistol lay upon the carpet near his chair. The smell of gunpowder hung heavy in the air. Upon the white expanse of his shirt bloomed a dark, spreading stain. Lady Margaret screamed. Evelyn staggered back, her handkerchief pressed against her lips. Colonel Redfern muttered a curse and strode forward. Poirot alone advanced with calm deliberation. He bent over the fallen man, his small hand touching the wrist, then the throat. He straightened slowly. "Alas," he murmured, "it is too late. Lord Blackmoor is dead." For a moment the room was filled only with the sound of the storm and the collective breathing of those present. Then Mrs. Harcourt burst out, "But how dreadful! Oh, what a tragedy! To take his own life, he—"
Cleared, save for Hastings. Poirot closed the door softly and turned once more to the body. "See here, mon ami, the wound. It is low upon the chest, not the temple or the mouth where suicides most often choose. And note the powder burns. Absent. If he had fired upon himself, there would be the scorching of the fabric, the mark upon the flesh. Yet here, nothing. The pistol was discharged from a distance." Hastings bent closer, frowning. "Then, he was murdered?" Poirot inclined his head gravely. "It is beyond doubt. Lord Blackmoor has been shot by another hand." They searched carefully, Poirot's methodical gaze missing no detail. Upon the edge of the desk lay a crumpled paper, half written, the ink still wet where the pen had been hastily cast aside. Poirot read aloud the unfinished line. "I can endure no more." "A suicide note?" Hastings asked. "Or the appearance of one," Poirot murmured. "But why unfinished? Why left in such haste? Non, mon ami, this is theatre, and poorly staged." Poirot next examined the carpet. "See here, the footprints. Damp, as though from the corridor, and not of Lord Blackmoor, whose slippers are dry. Someone entered after him, bringing the wet upon their shoes. And here, a small scrap of lace, caught upon the corner of the desk." Hastings started. "Lace? Good heavens, Poirot, that handkerchief I found!" Poirot held up a finger. "Gently, Hastings. Let us not yet accuse. But yes, it is suggestive." The constable arrived shortly after, a stolid countryman unused to tragedies of such grandeur. Poirot, with the courtesy and firmness of one accustomed to command, assumed direction, assuring the man that the investigation required delicacy and precision. The constable, relieved, deferred readily to the famous Belgian. Poirot then summoned the household once more to the drawing-room, where they gathered in strained silence. Lady Margaret, weeping softly, clung to her handkerchief. Evelyn sat rigid, her face pale, her eyes heard. "For now I beg you, rest in your rooms, and speak of this to no one beyond these walls. The truth, it hides, but it cannot remain hidden from Hercule Poirot." He inclined his head, and one by one the guests retired, subdued and fearful. When the drawing-room was empty, Hastings turned to Poirot. "This is dreadful, Poirot. Who could have done such a thing?" Poirot's eyes shone with that peculiar fire Hastings had come to know, the fire of the hunt. "Ah, Hastings, that is the question, is it not? Who had the opportunity, the motive, the courage to take the life of Lord Blackmoor? Already the clues whisper their story, the damp footprints, the lace, the quarrel overheard. But we must not leap, no, no. We must tread with the steps most delicate, for in this house each person has a secret, and some secrets kill." He looked toward the staircase where the others had gone. "The game has begun, mon ami, and I tell you this, the truth will astonish."
Chapter 5. The Gathering of Suspects.
The morning that followed the night of Lord Blackmoor's death was a bleak one. The storm had not wholly passed. Mist drifted across the moors like a pale funeral shroud, and the wet earth exhaled the scent of rain and sorrow. Blackmoor Hall itself seemed altered, its grand rooms hushed,
its corridors oppressive, as though the house were mourning its master. Poirot rose early. He partook of a modest breakfast of coffee and rolls, while Hastings stared mournfully at a plate he scarcely touched. The air was heavy, and conversation muted. Servants moved in subdued procession, whispering in corners. The constable, awkward and out of his depth, hovered like a schoolboy fearful of reprimand. Poirot, however, was in quiet command. After his breakfast, he requested that all members of the household and its guests assemble in the library. The room, sombre and wood-panelled, with shelves rising to the ceiling and the faint scent of leather and old paper, provided the perfect stage for his inquiries. A fire crackled in the grate, but its warmth did little to ease the tension. When the company had gathered, Poirot addressed them. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm, his manner grave. "A great tragedy has taken place. Lord Blackmoor has been shot. It is not an accident, nor is it the act of his own despair. It is murder." The word fell like a stone into a pond. Evelyn Hartley paled visibly. Lady Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her throat. Colonel Redfern muttered a soldier's oath. Charles Denham narrowed his eyes, while Mrs. Harcourt, though visibly delighted by the drama, affected a mask of shocked propriety. Poirot raised a hand for silence. "I shall conduct a series of conversations, one by one, that I may understand the events of last evening and the nature of those present in this house. Each of you has your truth, and hidden among those truths is the truth entire." He smiled faintly, moustaches immaculate. "You will forgive me, mes amis, if I inquire with persistence. Murder is not solved by politeness." He gestured toward Hastings.
Was proud. He feared scandal. He said his position, his title, his estate would be ruined if he married me. Yet he would not let me go either. I was trapped, Monsieur Poirot, between hope and despair. Poirot inclined his head. "And last night?" Her eyes filled with sudden tears. "We argued. I begged him for honesty. He grew angry, so angry, and I left him. But I swear, when I left, he was alive." Poirot leaned forward slightly. "Mademoiselle, a fragment of lace was found in the study. Lace most delicate, like that of your handkerchief." She gave a faint cry, her hands clasped tighter. "Then it must have torn when I left the room. I dropped my handkerchief, perhaps. But I did not shoot him, Monsieur Poirot. I swear it on my soul." Poirot studied her keenly, then inclined his head once more. "Merci, mademoiselle. You may retire." Lady Margaret Ellsworth. Lady Margaret swept in next, still elegant, despite her disarray. Her face bore the marks of sleepless grief, yet her eyes glittered with something harder. Fear, resentment, perhaps both. "Lady Margaret," Poirot began, "you were cousin to Lord Blackmoor. You stayed often at this house?" "Yes," she said coldly. "This was my second home. Henry relied upon me, or so I thought." Poirot's voice softened. "It is said you harbored hopes of an alliance, perhaps a union with him?" Her face stiffened, her pride bristling. "If you mean marriage, Monsieur Poirot, then yes. It was long understood that Henry and I would marry. It was suitable, expected, and, I will admit it, desired. But then she came." Her eyes flashed with venom toward Evelyn, though the woman was not present. The governess, with her soft looks and false modesty. Henry was bewitched, and I was cast aside. Poirot tilted his head. "So you had cause to resent him, and her."
Lady Margaret's lips thinned. Resentment is not murder, Monsieur Poirot. Anger is not crime. I argued with him, yes, but I am no assassin. I am a soldier. I kill in war, not in houses.
Poirot inclined his head gravely. A soldier, yes. And yet the pistol. You would be well acquainted with such weapons. Redfern's gaze hardened.
You imply much, Monsieur Poirot. But I tell you this, Henry Blackmoor was my friend, despite our quarrels. I would not have murdered him.
Poirot's expression betrayed neither belief nor doubt. Charles Denham. Denham entered next, smooth and confident, his manner almost insolent. He lounged into the chair as though it were his own drawing-room, his eyes meeting Poirot's with cool amusement. "Monsieur Poirot," he drawled, "you suspect me, no doubt. Everyone does. I am too convenient a villain." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Indeed, Monsieur Denham. And why are you convenient?" "Because I quarrelled with Blackmoor over business. He refused to sell me land. He spoke of honour and heritage. I spoke of profit. We did not agree." Denham smiled thinly. "But quarrels in commerce do not always end in murder." Poirot leaned forward. "Yet you had much to gain. If Blackmoor were dead, perhaps the estate might fall into other hands, more willing sellers." Denham's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, but you cannot prove that I was in that study. I was in my room, reading papers when the shot was fired. Alone, yes, but not guilty." Poirot regarded him coolly. "An alibi most fragile, monsieur. Yet your composure, it is remarkable. Too remarkable, perhaps." Denham merely smiled. Mrs. Clara Harcourt. Lastly came Mrs. Harcourt, fluttering into the library like a bird. Her gown was disordered, her eyes bright with morbid curiosity. She seated herself with exaggerated grace and leaned forward eagerly. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, what a dreadful affair! I can scarcely endure the suspense. To think, a murder in this very house, and poor Henry, so handsome, so tragic." Poirot raised a hand. "Madame, you are
Harcourt, for some foolish vanity." Poirot nodded slowly, his eyes alight with calculation. "Yes, Hastings. Motive, everywhere. Opportunity, likewise. But who had the courage, the will, and who sought to disguise their hand with the clumsy trick of a suicide note?" He tapped his fingers together. "The truth, mon ami, is here, in this house. And it will not remain hidden for long. Already, the little grey cells, they begin to see the pattern." He rose, his eyes narrowing with quiet fire. "This is not merely a crime of opportunity. It is a crime of passion, yes, but also of cunning. And Hercule Poirot will discover whose passion has turned to murder." Chapter 6. Clues and Contradictions. The library was hushed once more, its sombre oak panels and tall shelves bearing witness to centuries of secrets, but none so grave as the one now unfolding. Poirot stood before the hearth, his small figure silhouetted against the faint glow of the fire. Hastings, notebook in hand, leaned wearily against a desk. The storm had lessened outside, yet the air within the house remained charged, as though lightning still lingered in its rafters. "Mon cher Hastings," Poirot began softly, "it is now the hour when we must examine not only the words of our friends, but also the things they have left behind them. For the objects, they do not lie so easily as the tongue." Hastings nodded, though his eyes betrayed fatigue. "Yes, Poirot, but it's all a tangle to me.
Every one of them seems to have a reason, yet none of them an opportunity that fits neatly. And then there's that pistol. Poirot lifted a delicate finger. Exactement. The pistol is the first contradiction. A suicide, so they would have us believe. Yet the position of the weapon tells otherwise. Too far from the hand. The angle of the wound, not the angle of despair, but of confrontation. He paced slowly, fingertips pressed together. And then the letter, the note. It begins with words of despair.
Every corner. He paused by the desk, examining the ink-stained blotter. Regardez, Hastings. The ink upon the blotter is smeared, as though the pen was snatched hurriedly away. But also, here, upon the margin of the blotter, the faint impression of other words, written earlier and torn away. Hastings bent closer. By Jove, Poirot, you're right. But they're nearly invisible. Poirot smiled, faintly. Nearly, but not wholly. With a little powder, a little dust. Ah, but alas, we must make do with the eye alone. Yet I can discern something. A name. Look, the letters D-E-N. It is not complete, but it suggests Denham. Hastings whistled. Good heavens! Then Blackmoor was writing about Charles Denham before he died. Poirot raised his brows. Perhaps, or perhaps someone wished it to appear so. Never forget, Hastings, the murderer writes as much as the victim in these dramas. He next stooped to the carpet once more. And here, the footprints. They are damp, yes, but not muddy. They are narrow, elegant. The shoes of a lady, not a man. Hastings started. A lady? Then it must have been Miss Hartley, or Lady Margaret, or even Mrs. Harcourt. Poirot raised his hand. Patience, mon ami. Do not leap. The footprint is narrow, yes, but the size. It is larger than that of Miss Hartley, who has the foot most delicate. Closer, perhaps, to Lady Margaret. Yet the mark upon the heel is deeper, as though the wearer pressed with unusual force, perhaps from haste, perhaps from nerves. He straightened, his eyes alight. The contradiction grows, Hastings. We must gather them all, like flowers in a bouquet. Only when we see the arrangement entire shall we know whose hand tied the ribbon. Evelyn Hartley's chamber. Poirot next requested leave to examine Evelyn's room. Hastings followed awkwardly, uncomfortable with what felt like intrusion. Evelyn, pale but composed, granted permission, standing aside with quiet dignity, as Poirot's sharp eyes searched her modest chamber. On the dressing table lay a small box of handkerchiefs, dainty and embroidered.
Eyes filled with tears. Yes, he swore he would marry me, but his honor, his estate, his pride, always they came first. He was torn between duty and desire, and I was left with despair. Poirot bowed slightly. Merci, mademoiselle. It is enough for now. Colonel Redfern's room. The colonel's chamber was ordered with military precision. His boots gleamed, his bed was squared, his trunk neatly packed. Upon the desk lay correspondence, rows of figures, and bills marked urgent. Poirot lifted one, his brow raised. So, Hastings, the gallant colonel swims in debts. Debts most pressing. He required money, and who better than Blackmoor to supply it? Redfern flushed when confronted. Yes, I asked him. Yes, he refused, but I am no murderer, Poirot. I would sooner face a firing squad than stoop to such cowardice. Poirot's eyes lingered on the colonel's polished revolver case upon the shelf. Empty. Your own pistol, Colonel. Where is it? Redfern stiffened. I keep it locked. It is here. He drew a key from his pocket, opened the case, and revealed the gleaming weapon. Loaded. Untouched. Poirot inclined his head. Bon, then it was not yours. But you see, Hastings, contradiction again. A man who knows weapons leaves his own untouched, yet finds himself in a house where another pistol has killed.
Charles Denham's room. Denham's chamber was strewn with papers, maps, and deeds. Poirot leafed through them with deft fingers. Land, Hastings. All about land. Blackmoor's estate, the moors, the mines beneath them. Denham desired, Blackmoor refused. One document bore Blackmoor's signature, a draft contract, never executed. Poirot studied it with keen interest. A deal almost made, then broken. And see, the ink is recent. They quarreled, yes, and more than once. Denham, entering uninvited, leaned against the doorframe with a thin smile. Yes, Monsieur Poirot, he would not sell. But murder? That is not my method of acquisition. I prefer signatures, not bullets. Poirot bowed slightly. Perhaps, but one signature, forced by death, may yet serve.
Scarves. On her writing desk lay a journal, open to a page filled with eager scrawl. Evelyn and Henry alone again. Scandal certain. If only I might be the one to restore the family's honor. Poirot closed it gently, his brows arched. A gossip, yes, but also a dreamer of ambitions. Madame Harcourt saw herself as Lady Blackmoor, perhaps? Mrs. Harcourt fluttered nervously. I may have hoped. But hopes are not crimes, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, but when hope turns to bitterness, one must be careful. That evening Poirot gathered again with Hastings in the library. The fire crackled low, and the great house lay in uneasy silence. Well, Poirot, Hastings said heavily, every one of them is entangled. Evelyn with love, Margaret with jealousy, Redfern with debts, Denham with business, Mrs. Harcourt with vanity, and each left a trail of sorts. But who, in heaven's name, actually fired the shot? Poirot's eyes glittered as he gazed into the flames. That, mon ami, is the question. Each has motive, each has opportunity, yet the contradictions betray them. A suicide note unfinished, footprints that do not match the tale, lace that betrays a presence denied, a name half-written, and above all, a pistol discharged, yet no powder burns. He rose, pacing slowly. No, Hastings, the truth is here, in this house, and it grows nearer. Soon the little grey cells will assemble the puzzle entire. And when they do, his moustaches twitched, there shall be revelations most astonishing. Chapter 7. The Red Herrings. The following morning broke with a pale, uncertain light, as though the very heavens withheld their judgment. Blackmoor Hall stood draped in mist, its turrets and chimneys blurred into ghostly outlines. Within, the household stirred uneasily, each inhabitant haunted by the events of the night just past and by the unspoken dread of what Poirot might uncover. Breakfast was a strained affair. The long table in remains. The words fell like stones into a pond, rippling uneasily across the table. Evelyn's distress. Later, as the company dispersed, Evelyn approached Hastings in the gallery. Her hands trembled as she clasped his sleeve. Captain Hastings, you believe me, do you not? You must. I loved him, Henry, with all my heart. Yes, I quarreled with him. Yes, I fled in tears. But I could never, never have harmed him. Hastings, torn between chivalry and reason, stammered reassurances. Yet Poirot, observing from a distance, merely tapped his mustaches. Emotion, Hastings, he murmured when she had gone. It is real, yes. But real emotion can be both innocent and guilty. The tears, they may conceal as well as reveal. Do not allow the heart to blind the eye. Still, Hastings could not help but be moved,
and as he considered Evelyn's fragile beauty, he began to suspect that perhaps she was indeed the tragic heroine, cruelly misjudged. The Colonel's Alibi. Poirot turned next to Colonel Redfern, requesting a private word in the library. The Colonel, stiff-backed and defiant, agreed with military courtesy. "Colonel," Poirot began, "the night of the death, where were you at the precise hour, between 10 and 11? Redfern frowned. "I was in my room, reading. Alone, I admit, but I did not stir from it." Poirot tilted his head. "And yet, mon colonel, the housemaid reports that she heard footsteps in the corridor near the study at that hour. Heavy, measured footsteps, such as a soldier makes." The Colonel colored. "Coincidence, or her imagination? I was not there." Poirot smiled faintly. "It is curious. A man of honor, yes? Yet debts weigh heavily. Blackmoor refused you. Desperation can drive even the most honorable to dishonor." Redfern's fists clenched. "I am no murderer," he thundered. To Hastings, listening nearby, it seemed conviction itself. Yet Poirot's little gray cells whispered otherwise, too loud, too vehement. A man truly guilty might speak less.
Last deduction of Poirot. No, it smells of the red herring, thrown across our path. But then came the most damning of discoveries. The footprints. Poirot had already noted their similarity to Lady Margaret's shoes. Now Inspector Fowler produced further evidence. The gardener had seen Lady Margaret cross the lawn late at night, her cloak drawn close, heading toward the study wing. When confronted, Lady Margaret's face blanched. "Yes, I went. I do not deny it. I wished to see him one last time, to beg him, to plead. But when I reached the study, the door was locked. I could hear voices inside, Henry's and another's. I fled before I was seen." "Another's voice?" Poirot seized upon it. "Yes, low, urgent, angry. I could not distinguish whose, but it was a man." This revelation cast suspicion anew. If true, it exonerated Lady Margaret, for the pistol had fired within moments. Yet it also muddied the waters, for who was the man within? Redfern? Denham? Even Blackmoor's valet, whose alibi was vague. Fowler, triumphantly, declared, "We have her, Poirot. The shoes, the sighting, the motive. It's as plain as day." Poirot merely wagged a finger. "Plain as day, my friend, is sometimes too plain. Let us not embrace the easy answer." Still, the seed of doubt had been sown in every mind. Lady Margaret, proud, spurned, humiliated, what more natural than that she should strike in passion? Mrs. Harcourt's rumor. The final distraction came courtesy of Mrs. Harcourt. Eager to unburden herself, she confided to Hastings in a breathless whisper. "You must know, Captain Hastings, there is more to it all. Evelyn and Henry, theirs was no innocent flirtation. Why, I heard them myself not a week ago, quarreling bitterly. She threatened him, oh yes, she did. Said she would ruin him if he betrayed her. That surely is evidence enough." Hastings, troubled, relayed this to Poirot, who received it with lifted brows. "Mais oui, the rumor, it is dangerous. It is like perfume.
By circumstance. But I say to you, patience. For circumstance is the paintbrush of the amateur. The true portrait of truth requires a finer hand." His eyes gleamed as he looked from face to face. "The murderer, he is among you. But the truth, it is not yet ready to step into the light. First, the false paths must lead us astray. Then, and only then, shall the little gray cells bring us home." He bowed slightly, signaling dismissal. Yet even as the company dispersed in murmurs and anxious whispers, Poirot remained, gazing into the fire. To Hastings, he whispered at last, "The murderer has played well. He has sown suspicion in every corner. But soon, Hastings, soon, he shall overplay his hand. And then, poof, the truth will be ours." Chapter 8. The Web Tightens. The next day dawned clearer than any since Poirot and Hastings had first arrived at Blackmoor Hall. The moor stretched beneath a sky of washed blue, dotted with clouds like torn lace. Yet despite the outward calm, the atmosphere within the ancient house remained taut with unease, as though the very walls leaned inward to listen to the whispers that twined along its corridors. Hercule Poirot, immaculately dressed in grey, descended the grand staircase at a leisurely pace. Hastings, waiting below, noticed the sparkle of purpose in his friend's dark eyes. "Poirot," he said quietly, "you look this morning like a man on the scent." Poirot smiled, fingertips pressed together. "But naturally, Hastings. The scent, it grows stronger. The false trails, they have served their part. Now, we sweep them aside and see what remains. It is time to tighten the web." Evelyn's secret revealed. Poirot began his morning not with questions, but with a request. He asked Evelyn Hartley to meet him in the music room, where pale shafts of sun fell through the tall windows upon the polished surface of the grand piano. Evelyn entered hesitantly, her cheeks pale, her hands clasped tightly. Poirot greeted her with warmth, then gestured to the seat. "Mademoiselle," he said gently, "you have been much distressed. It is natural. You loved Monsieur Blackmoor, and he—"
She admitted. "I tore my handkerchief as I fled. But I did not return, I swear it." Poirot studied her closely. "And these letters, mademoiselle? They are not all here. Some are missing." She hesitated. "Yes, one letter. The most damning. I destroyed it." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "Ah, that is not wise to destroy evidence. But it is not the act of a murderer. It is the act of a woman desperate to shield her pride." When Evelyn left, Hastings turned to Poirot. "So you believe her now?" Poirot shrugged delicately. "I believe she is no longer at the center of the web, but the strands of her story connect to another. We must see where they lead." The Colonel's contradiction. Next, Poirot sought out Colonel Redfern, whom he found in the billiards room, practicing shots with grim determination. "Colonel," Poirot began, "you are a man of honor, yes? But honor, when pressed by debt, is a fragile shield. You told me you were in your room at the hour of the crime. Yet the maid heard footsteps, firm, military. What say you?" The Colonel slammed his cue upon the table. "Dash it all, Poirot, I was walking, yes! My nerves were in a devilish state. I paced the corridor, but I did not enter the study." "Alors," Poirot said softly, "you admit to what you denied before. That is progress. And the debts, how urgent were they, Colonel?" Redfern's shoulders sagged. "Urgent enough that I begged Blackmoor for a loan. He refused. He said he would not throw good money after bad, but I would never have shot him. I sought only to postpone ruin, not hasten another man's death." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then why, Colonel, did you not tell me this truth yesterday?" The Colonel scowled. "Because I knew how it would look, and I could not bear to have my honor questioned." "Eh bien," Poirot replied softly, "it is questioned now. Yet I believe your words, for they ring with shame, not with guilt. A guilty man hides, Colonel. He does not confess piecemeal." Denham in the spotlight. Charles Denham ever—
"Do you not see, Poirot? My interest was in his life, not his death."
Poirot's little grey cells stirred. Here indeed was a contradiction. Motive apparent, gain absent. Lady Margaret's desperation. Lady Margaret, summoned reluctantly, arrived with hauteur masking her unease. Poirot gestured toward the shoes upon the table. "Milady, these shoes, they are damp, marked. The prints in the study match them. You cannot deny it." Her chin lifted. "I do not. I went to him, yes. I told you before, I heard voices, but I did not enter." "And yet, madame," Poirot said softly, "if you heard another voice, whose was it? Think carefully." She faltered. "It was deep, harsh. I thought perhaps Colonel Redfern's." Redfern, present in the room, swore violently. "A lie! A damned lie!" Poirot raised a hand. "Calm yourself, Colonel. Lady Margaret speaks as she recalls. But memory, it is a treacherous companion. What she heard may be true, or it may be her heart inventing an enemy. Still, it is a thread, and threads may bind." Lady Margaret's eyes flashed with sudden tears. "He betrayed me, Poirot. He promised me a future, then cast me aside. But I did not kill him. If I had wished him dead, I would have slain him with words, not bullets." Poirot studied her, noting the bitterness beneath her grief. A soul wounded, yes. But did that wound fester into murder? Mrs. Harcourt's folly. At last, Poirot confronted Mrs. Harcourt in her own chamber. She received him with fluttering hands and protestations of innocence. "Madame," Poirot said crisply, "you are fond of whisperings, n'est-ce pas? But whispers can wound. You tell tales of Evelyn, of quarrels and threats, yet I find in your diary not only gossip, but ambition. You dreamed of Blackmoor as your own, did you not?" Her cheeks coloured. "I may have fancied the possibility, but such dreams—"
Her, yet words that do not. Mrs. Harcourt, ambition, gossip, but little opportunity. Do you see, mon ami, each holds a piece, but none the whole. Hastings sighed. It's more entangled than ever. Poirot leaned forward, eyes glittering. Precisely, Hastings. It is the entanglement that betrays the spider. For amid all these contradictions, there is one truth. The murderer has overplayed his hand. A detail, small, overlooked by all, reveals itself to the eyes of Poirot. And soon, very soon, the net shall close. He sat back, fingers steepled, moustaches twitching with satisfaction. Tomorrow, my friend, I shall summon them all. The denouement approaches, and then the silence of Blackmoor Hall shall be broken forever. Chapter 9. The Gathering of Suspects. Night drew down once more upon Blackmoor Hall, cloaking the moors in a velvet darkness, pricked with the faint shimmer of stars. The air was chill, the kind of chill that crept not only through the stone walls of the house, but also into the hearts of its inhabitants. All day they had lived in the shadow of uncertainty, each step dogged by suspicion, each glance shadowed by doubt. At Poirot's request, the household assembled in the great drawing-room at 9 o'clock. A fire glowed on the hearth, casting a restless flicker upon the carved panels. Candles stood lit upon the mantelpiece and along the long table, their flames wavering whenever a draught stirred from the ancient corridors. One by one, the suspects entered, their faces masks of composure thinly veiling turmoil. Evelyn Hartley came first, pale as porcelain, her eyes shadowed from sleeplessness. Lady Margaret followed, head high, though her lips trembled as she pressed them into a thin line. Charles Denham entered briskly, his step too assured, his smile too narrow.
Colonel Redfern marched in with military stiffness, his jaw set, his gaze defensive. Last came Mrs. Harcourt, fluttering, her perfume trailing in the air, her eyes darting from face to face with nervous avidity. Margaret's chin lifted defiantly. Mrs. Harcourt drew in a sharp breath and nearly dropped her lace handkerchief. Poirot began pacing, his hands clasped behind his back. First, let us consider the method. At first glance, it appeared Sir Henry took his own life. A pistol discharged, a note of despair upon his desk. But no, already we see contradictions. The pistol lay too far from his hand. The wound entered at an angle unnatural for suicide. And the note? The note. Unfinished, cut short mid-sentence. Does a man resolved upon death fail to finish his final word? No, he does not. And so the play was staged. Murder masqueraded as suicide. A murmur rippled through the group. Inspector Fowler nodded grimly, but Hastings scribbled furiously in his notebook. Now we look at the suspects, Poirot continued, turning slowly so that his eyes passed over each face. Mademoiselle Evelyn Hartley, her lace torn, found in the study, her letters of love, her quarrel with Sir Henry. It seemed damning, did it not? Yet what do we find? That she wept, she fled, she tore her lace as she ran. The fragment condemns her not, it merely shows her sorrow. Evelyn gasped, her eyes brimming. Colonel Redfern, Poirot went on, the soldier with debts. His footsteps were heard, his honor tarnished. But what is his crime? To pace a corridor in despair? He lied, yes, but out of shame, not guilt. A man who fears dishonor more than death does not stoop to shoot a friend in the back. The colonel exhaled heavily, as though relieved of a weight. Charles Denham, the businessman. He had the most to gain. Land, coal, wealth. A contract unsigned, a quarrel bitter. All the world would say, voila, the murderer. But no, in truth, his gain was lost in Blackmoor's death. With heirs unwilling to sell, Denham stood to profit only from the man's life, not his death. His motive dissolves like mist in sunlight. Denham gave a cold smile, though sweat gleamed at his temple. Lady Margaret, Poirot's voice softened. The proud deepened, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then Poirot continued, his tone sharper. But now, let us speak of the truth. Consider the details, always the details. The unfinished note, the pistol, yes? A revolver discharged at close range, and yet, upon the hand of Sir Henry, no mark of powder. Eh bien, if he shot himself, there must be powder burns. There were none. Therefore, another held the pistol. And what of the footprints? They were narrow. Of a lady, yes, but the depth of the heel was strange. Heavier than a lady's step. As though... Poirot paused, his voice dropping. As though a man wore the shoes of a woman to mislead. Gasps erupted. Lady Margaret rose half from her chair. What? What do you mean? Poirot held up a hand. Patience. Consider also the blotter, the faint impression of a name. Denham. Written not by Sir Henry, but by another hand pressing upon the page to forge a note. The forgery clumsy. Interrupted. Who would have such boldness? Who would seek to thrust suspicion upon another? His eyes swept the room, pausing upon each face, then resting at last on one. Yes, mes amis, the murderer sought to weave a net of lies. Lace torn, shoes planted, letters whispered, debts exposed. But one strand betrayed him, a detail small, overlooked, yet fatal. Poirot's revelation approaches. The company sat frozen, every face pale, every breath held. Hastings leaned forward, his pencil forgotten, his eyes wide with anticipation. Inspector Fowler straightened, his skepticism fading into awe. Poirot drew himself up, his small figure radiating command. "Tomorrow I shall show you the detail. Tomorrow I shall name the hand that fired the pistol and the heart that conceived the crime. For tonight, mes amis, you shall rest uneasily, knowing the truth is but an hour away." He bowed, as though in a theater, and the silence of the room deepened into dread. The suspects filed out, one by one, their steps uncertain, their eyes clouded with fear. Evelyn clutched her
painting the ancient chamber in pale gold. Outside, the moors lay quiet, veiled in mist that clung low to the earth like a ghost reluctant to depart. Within the great drawing room, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The company had gathered once more, summoned by Hercule Poirot for what he promised would be the final word. The fire burned brightly, though its warmth seemed powerless to dispel the chill of fear. Evelyn Hartley sat hunched, her hands clenched in her lap, her eyes swollen from weeping. Lady Margaret appeared stiff, her gown immaculate, her pride acting as a shield against dread. Colonel Redfern stood apart, his military bearing rigid, his fists clasped behind his back. Mrs. Harcourt perched upon a chair, fluttering her lace handkerchief, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Charles Denham leaned casually against the mantelpiece, though the tautness of his jaw betrayed the strain behind the facade. Inspector Fowler was present too, seated sternly at the side, his pen poised for the record. Hastings, ever faithful, stood by Poirot, his notebook open, but his thoughts racing far ahead of his words. Poirot, small and precise, entered at last. His step was deliberate, his face serene, his moustaches immaculate. As he came to the center of the room, silence fell so complete that the ticking of the long-case clock sounded like a hammer upon steel. "Mesdames, messieurs," Poirot began with a little bow, "we arrive at the end of our drama. You are gathered here so that I may set before you the truth entire, without shadow or doubt. For the murderer of Sir Henry Blackmoor sits among us, and he shall be named. The reconstruction." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly as he spoke. "Permit me first to reconstruct the crime. On the night of his death, Sir Henry retired to his study. He was restless, for his affairs weighed heavily upon him. He had argued with Denham. He had quarrelled with Evelyn. He had wounded Lady Margaret with cruel words. His mind was troubled, mais oui. But as he sat at his desk, he was not alone. Someone entered. Someone who brought not comfort, but death. A pistol was produced, a shot fired. Elegant. This was but an imitation. Who wrote it? A man accustomed to signing documents in haste, his letters sharp and angular. That, I think, we find in Mr. Denham. Denham stiffened but said nothing. Second, the footprints. At first glance, a lady's shoe, narrow, high-heeled. Lady Margaret's, perhaps. But the weight behind them was wrong, too heavy. They were not hers. They were made by a man wearing a woman's shoes. And who, I ask, would have such access, such daring? Only one who sought to throw suspicion upon another. Lady Margaret gasped, her cheeks flushing with outrage. Third, the pistol. Sir Henry's revolver, yes, fired at close range, but without powder burns upon his hand. Ergo, he did not fire it. Another stood before him and pulled the trigger. And finally, the fragment of lace. Torn in haste, yes, but planted with deliberation. To implicate the young Mademoiselle Evelyn, whose love would provide the perfect motive. But it was too neat, too convenient. I, Hercule Poirot, do not believe in such convenience. The psychology. Poirot turned, his gaze sweeping the company. And what of the psychology? Each of you had cause to wish Sir Henry harm. Mademoiselle Evelyn, her heart broken. Lady Margaret,
her pride insulted. Colonel Redfern, his debts and dishonor. Madame Harcourt, her dreams thwarted. Monsieur Denham, his business imperiled. But motives, they are like the smoke. They rise, they swirl. To find the fire beneath, one must ask, who had the coldness of heart to plan such deception? His gaze rested upon Denham. You, Monsieur Denham, you are a man of figures, of contracts, of calculations. You quarrelled with Sir Henry, yes, but more. You stood to gain land, coal, profit beyond measure if only you could press his heirs to sell. You forged his note, you planted the shoes, you scattered the lace. Each act was clever in design, but careless in execution. You underestimated the little grey cells, the confrontation. Denham's face had grown pale, though his lips still curved in a tight smile. This is absurd.
Ah, but I have. For you see, when I examined the revolver, I noted something most curious. A faint smear of oil, not upon a handle, but upon the trigger guard. And who but you, Monsieur Denham, oils his pistol with the same brand of machinery oil he keeps for his mining tools? A rare brand, imported, unique, and upon your desk in town, the very same. Denham's face drained of color. He staggered, his bravado shattered. "Damn you," he whispered. The Inspector Fowler stepped forward, his voice hard. "Charles Denham, I arrest you for the murder of Sir Henry Blackmoor." Denham sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "He mocked me," he muttered hoarsely. "Mocked my work, my contracts, my future. He thought me small. He thought me a man to be dismissed with a wave. I could not endure it. I meant to frighten him, but in the moment..." His voice broke. "I killed him." A silence fell, heavy as the grave. Evelyn wept openly. Lady Margaret turned her face away. Redfern muttered a curse beneath his breath. Mrs. Harcourt crossed herself, whispering prayers. Poirot stood still, his eyes unreadable. Murder, Monsieur Denham, is never born in the moment alone. It grows from pride, from anger, from greed, and so it destroys not only its victim, but the murderer also. Aftermath. Denham was taken into custody. The household dissolved into uneasy quiet. Evelyn, her name cleared, withdrew to her chamber in tears. Lady Margaret stood proud, though her eyes betrayed her sorrow. Colonel Redfern muttered of honor and shame. Mrs. Harcourt fluttered, eager already to spread the tale beyond the walls of Blackmoor. In the quiet that followed, Hastings turned to Poirot, his voice full of awe. "By Jove, Poirot, you've done it again. Every clue, every detail, it all fitted so perfectly in the end. But I must confess I never saw it. I was sure it was Lady Margaret, or perhaps even poor Evelyn." Poirot smiled gently, twirling his mustaches. "You see, Hastings, the murderer counts upon just such assumptions. He gives us the clue too obvious, the motive too